They dragged her off the jet, and she asked only one thing: don't touch the medical case. Cecilia Rose is a black doctor, 32, a doctorate behind her name. That morning she'd nursed her son's fever, packed the medication case, and boarded a private jet bound for Seoul. On the tarmac, a young heiress looked at the elegant black woman standing quietly by the cabin and saw a nobody. Madison Halston snapped her fingers. Security moved. Grant Whitaker's gloved hand closed on Cecilia's arm. Cecilia did not shout. She held the case against her chest. She said the equipment stays untouched. From the jet's stairs, Richard Halston watched the whole thing. He said nothing. He let it happen. Then the man in the charcoal suit came back. Han Do-yoon. They call him the Quiet One. Black koi and hanja climbing the left side of his neck, above the collar, a watch worth more than the terminal. He didn't raise his voice either. He asked Cecilia first what happened. He checked the logs. He confirmed Richard had seen it all and allowed it. And then he gave one order. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The thermometer read 102, and Cecilia read it twice before she let herself breathe. She wiped it clean, set it beside the sink, and went back down the dark hall to the room where her son slept badly. Noah had kicked the blanket to the floor again. She picked it up, folded it once, and laid it across his small legs. His forehead was damp under her palm. Not dangerous yet. Close, but not yet. She sat on the edge of the mattress and counted his breaths the way she counted everything, quietly, without moving her lips. 22 a minute. High for a sleeping 7-year-old, but the fever explained it. She had seen worse in children who weren't hers and stayed steady. With her own, she had to work for the same steadiness. She earned it every time. Mama? His eyes stayed shut. I'm here. Sleep. Is it morning? Almost. Not for you. He turned his cheek into the pillow and let go of the waking. She stayed until his breathing dropped back to something slow. Then she stood, joints stiff, and looked at the clock on his shelf. 4:11. She had a car coming at 6:40. Between now and then, she had 2 lives to hold in 2 hands and not let either one see the other. In the kitchen, she filled a glass with water and didn't drink it. On the counter sat the reason her night had a deadline. A compact black medical case, hard-shelled, the size of a thick book, its handle worn pale at the grip where she carried it. She had packed it 3 times already. She opened it a 4th. Inside, foam cut to shape held everything in its place. 2 auto-injectors. A blister strip of tablets in a labeled sleeve. A folded card in her own handwriting, listing doses, times, and the one interaction that mattered. A backup vial, sealed. A pulse oximeter. She checked the injectors against the light, checked the expiry on the vial, checked the tablet count against the number on the card. Everything answered. She closed the lid until it clicked. The case was going to Seoul. She was going with it, at least as far as the plane. After that, the plane went on, and she came home to a boy with a fever and a life that fit in a kitchen at 4 in the morning. She stood over it a moment longer than the work required. Her thumb found the worn spot on the handle and rested there. A year ago, the case had been empty, bought on a hunch after the first bad night, when she'd driven home from his apartment at 3 and realized she'd been treating a man she loved with a hospital's leftovers and her own 2 hands. She had never let that happen again. Every item in the foam was a thing she'd learned the hard way, a gap she'd closed, a middle-of-the-night fear she'd answered with an object she could hold. Other women kept photographs. She kept a kit. From the hall came the small sounds of a sick child not quite asleep. A cough, the shift of weight, the blanket moving. She listened without going in. Going in would wake him fully, and he needed the sleep more than she needed to check. So she stood in the kitchen and listened and let the listening be enough, which was its own kind of discipline, harder than any procedure she'd ever performed under lights. She had built the case herself, prescription by prescription, over the past year. No pharmacy handed a man a kit like this. A cardiologist did, one who knew exactly which minutes counted when a body under strain decided to skip a beat and keep skipping. Han Do-yoon's body had made that decision twice in the time she'd known him. Both times, she had been 3 feet away with the right thing in her hand. That was not luck. Luck was what other people called the work you did in the dark, so no one had to see you do it. She poured the untouched water back and rinsed the glass. Her phone lit face down on the counter. She turned it over. A single line, no name attached, the way they kept it. Wheels up 8. Case with you? She typed back one word. Packed. She set the phone down and let the screen go dark on its own. They had rules. She had written most of them. Do-yoon kept them, because she asked him to, and because he understood, better than she'd expected a man like him to understand, what she stood to lose. He moved through a world of men who measured a woman by whose arm she stood on. She had spent 11 years making sure no one measured her that way. Medical school, residency, the fellowship she'd fought a committee to keep, a doctorate she'd defended 8 months pregnant with a dead husband's name still on the mailbox. She had a title that took a decade to earn, and a sentence that could erase it in a room full of strangers. That's the boss's woman. Once that sentence was spoken, it could not be unspoken. She knew this the way she knew fevers, so the 2 lives stayed apart. In one, she was Dr. Rose, consultant, a name on a contract, a professional who happened to travel with a private aviation group. In the other, she was a woman who kept a toothbrush at a man's apartment and left before his staff arrived. The plane was where the 2 lives came closest to touching, and even there she boarded as the doctor, only ever as the doctor. She had watched it happen to another woman once, years back, at a fundraiser she'd been invited to for reasons that had nothing to do with the man she came with. A surgeon, a real one, hands that saved people, and the whole room had turned her into a coat on someone's arm inside a single evening. By dessert, no one asked her a question that wasn't about him. Cecilia had stood at the edge of that room and made herself a promise the way you make a promise at 25, certain you'll be the exception. She was 32 now, and she wasn't certain of anything except the arithmetic. The arithmetic was why she kept the coat over her own arm and boarded her own plane and answered to her own name. Do-yoon had asked her once, early, why the rules mattered so much, when he'd have handed her the world in front of anyone who cared to watch. She'd told him the world he was offering came with her name crossed out and his written over it. He had gone quiet for a long time. Then he'd said, "Then we keep your name." He had kept it since. It was the single most romantic thing anyone had ever done for her, and no one would ever know it happened, and that was exactly the shape of the whole thing. She went to shower before the light came. Under the water, she let herself think the thought she didn't allow in daylight, that she was tired. Not of him, of the arithmetic, of the timing of every text, the choosing of every coat, the calculation of which door to leave by. She thought about a morning where she woke up in one life instead of stitching 2 together at the seams. Then she turned the water off, because the thought had no place to go, and a boy with a fever needed his mother dressed and calm and downstairs before a stranger's car pulled up. She dried her hair with her fingers and let the curls fall where they wanted, dark and full and heavy past her shoulders, the way they came out when she had no time to fight them. She dressed for the airport, the ivory suit, sharp at the shoulder, cut to move, the camel coat over her arm for the cold on the tarmac, nude heels she could stand in for hours, and a leather bag that held a laptop and a life. She looked like exactly what her contract said she was. That was the point. Downstairs, Mrs. Okafor was already at the door, keys in hand, the woman who had watched Noah sleep on 100 of these mornings. She took one look at Cecilia's face and said, "Fever? 102 at 4. It'll climb by 9. Cecilia set the medicine on the counter, lined up in the order she'd give it. Ibuprofen at 7, not before. Fluids every hour whether he wants them or not. If he hits 104, or if he stops making sense, you call me and you call the number under it, and you don't wait for me to answer the first one. I know the drill. I know you know." She said it softer. "Say it back anyway." The older woman said it back, every step, because she understood that Cecilia needed to hear her own instructions in another mouth before she could walk out the door. That was the tax. Every time she left, she paid it. Noah came down in his socks, dinosaur backpack dragging, cheeks too pink. He was not going to school, and he knew it, and he'd brought the backpack anyway, as protest or comfort, she couldn't tell. "You're leaving." Not a question. He had his grandfather's way of stating things that hurt so they'd hurt less. "For the day. I'll be on the ground before your dinner." She crouched to his level. Her knees found the cold of the tile. "Mrs. Okafor's got you, and I'm one phone call away the whole time. What's the rule about the phone?" "You always pick up." "I always pick up." She held his face in both hands, felt the heat coming off him, and did not let it into her voice. "Drink your water even when it's boring, especially when it's boring." "Where do you even go?" he mumbled into her shoulder. He asked it most mornings. She gave him a version he could hold. "To help someone who's sick, like you. Except grown up, so he's grumpier about the water than you are." That got a laugh out of him, small and wet. "Grown-ups are bad at being sick." "The worst," she agreed. "The very worst. You'd be amazed." He pulled back to look at her with his father's serious eyes, in a 7-year-old's flushed face. Does he say thank you? She thought about a man who said a third of what other men said. In his way, she said. You'd have to know how to listen for it. He leaned his whole weight into her again, the way sick children do, trusting the body in front of them to hold. She held. For 4 seconds, she was only his mother, and nothing else. No contract, no plane, no case on the counter. Then the car's headlights swept the front window, and the 4 seconds were spent. She kissed his hot forehead. She stood. She picked up the black case last, after the bag, after the coat, because it was the thing she would not set down again until it was somewhere safe. Go save the world, Mrs. Okafor said, dry, the way she said it every time. Just one man in it, Cecilia answered, which was closer to true than the older woman knew. The car was black and quiet, and the driver knew not to talk. She sat with the case flat across her knees and watched the city thin out into the road that led to the private field. Streetlights strobed across the case's hard shell. She rested one hand flat on top of it, the way another woman might rest a hand on a sleeping child, and she went over the doses again in her head, though she knew them cold. The card inside said what she already carried in her bones. She checked it anyway. Checking was how she loved people. She had never learned another language for it that felt as sure. Her phone buzzed once. Mrs. Okafor, a photo of Noah on the couch, blanket to his chin, a cartoon frozen on the screen, one thumb up for the camera. Cecilia looked at it longer than she needed to. Then she put the phone face down on the case and watched the road. The city gave way to industrial flats, then to fencing, then to the long approach road, where the streetlights ran out and the sky started to show its first gray at the edges. She used the quiet the way she used everything, deliberately. She ran the cabin briefing in her head. Which injector first, where the tablets sat, what the crew needed to watch for over the Pacific, the one number that meant land the plane. She would say it once, clearly, to whoever ran the cabin, and she would make them say it back, because she trusted repetition more than she trusted good intentions. People in this world were competent and busy, and both of those things killed patience when the moment came. She thought about Do-yun somewhere across the field already, moving through the quiet way he did, saying a third of what other men said, and meaning all of it. She thought about how he'd looked the first night his heart had faltered, not afraid, which unsettled her more than fear would have, a man watching his own pulse skip like it belonged to someone else. She'd put the injector against his thigh and told him to breathe, and he'd breathed because she said to. Afterward, he had looked at her for a long moment and said only, "You knew what to do before I knew what was wrong." That was the closest he came to telling her what she was to him. She'd taken it. From him, it was a whole sentence. The field came up out of the dark, a low line of hangars and one lit terminal building, and beyond it, tail numbers pale against the gray. Somewhere on that apron sat the jet that would carry the case to Seoul. She did the last arithmetic of the drive, board as the doctor, hand off the kit, brief the cabin crew on the injectors, be off the plane before the important people came up the stairs, be home before Noah's fever peaked. 2 lives, 1 morning, no seam showing. The car slowed at the gate. A guard leaned to the window, checked a list, waved them through. Cecilia gathered her coat, her bag, the case. She caught her own reflection in the dark glass as they rolled toward the terminal. Composed, upright, unremarkable in the way that cost the most effort. A woman with a job and a plane to catch. Nothing on her face said mother, or doctor of a decade's fight, or the person one man in this city trusted with the beat of his own heart. That was the plan. Give them nothing to read and they read nothing. She had run this plan a dozen times and it had never failed her. The doctor boards, the doctor works, the doctor leaves. No one on that apron knew her face. No one on that apron had a reason to. She was a line item on a services agreement, a professional courtesy the aviation group extended to a valued partner, a woman with a black case and a calm mouth. Invisible in the exact way she had chosen to be invisible. She had spent a year making herself into someone this world would overlook, and she had done it so well that she'd stopped thinking of it as a risk. She thought of it as armor. She was about to learn the difference. She stepped out into air that smelled of jet fuel and cold morning. The tarmac stretched flat and pale toward the aircraft, and the wind off the open field pushed her coat against her legs. She settled the strap of her bag on her shoulder, took the handle of the black case firmly in her right hand, and started across the apron toward the stairs, the medicine steady at her side, her heels finding the seams in the concrete without a sound. She did not see the woman in white step down from the far jet and stop, and turn, and watch her come. The woman in white did not wait for Cecilia to reach the stairs. She crossed the apron on her own line, cutting the distance at an angle, stiletto heels striking the concrete in a quick, clean rhythm that carried over the low hum of the auxiliary units. She reached the foot of the boarding stairs first, and stopped there, one hand on the rail, and turned so that her shoulder blocked the bottom step. Cecilia slowed. 10 feet. She read the block for what it was, and kept her pace even, the black case steady in her right hand. "This aircraft is closed," Madison said. She said it the way people say a thing they have said many times to many people who did not matter. "Deliveries go to the service door on the other side of the hangar." Cecilia stopped at a polite distance. "I'm not a delivery." Madison's eyes moved down her once and came back up. They took in the ivory suit, the camel coat, the tan tote, and stopped on the case. "Then you're catering, or you're cleaning, or you're lost." A small smile. "Whichever it is, It's not up these stairs. I'm expected on this flight. By whom? Cecilia held the name. She had held it for a year, across dinners, across airports, across 100 small chances to spend it, and she held it now, out of the same habit that kept a toothbrush in a drawer and a doctorate off a manifest. The passenger, she said. I'm on the crew manifest as medical staff. The word medical did something to Madison's mouth. It flattened it. There's no medical staff on this manifest, she said. I read it this morning. Catering, 2 flight attendants, ground. No doctors. She let the last word sit in the cold air like it was too clean for the woman in front of her to be holding. So either you lied about who you are, or you're confused about which jet is yours. There's a public terminal past the fence. They'll help you find your gate. A gust came off the taxiway and moved the coat against Cecilia's legs. She planted her heels and let it pass. I need to board with this case, she said. The equipment inside is time-sensitive. Please step aside. Time-sensitive. Madison laughed once, short, delighted by it. She half-turned toward the top of the stairs, toward the open cabin door, and lifted her voice without lifting her eyes off Cecilia. Grant. The tactical figure had been standing near the wing, half in the shadow of the fuselage, radio riding his shoulder. He came at the call the way a door closes. He was big through the chest, head shaved, gray stubble on a jaw that had been broken once and set crooked, and he moved without hurry, because hurry was for men who were not sure they would win. This one wants up the stairs, Madison said. She's not on my list. Walk her back to the fence. Grant looked at Cecilia. He looked at the case. He did not look at Madison, which told Cecilia everything about who paid him and who only thought she did. Ma'am, he said, terminal's this way. I'm boarding this aircraft. You're not. Cecilia set her weight back an inch. Not a retreat, a brace. Do you know whose jet this is? That was the wrong question, and she knew it the second it left her, because the answer they had already decided was that it was theirs, and every word she spent arguing the point, spent it in their currency. She saw Madison's chin lift a half-inch, pleased, the way a person is pleased when someone hands them the exact objection they were waiting to crush. It's ours, Madison said. It's the joint fleet. My father's on the manifest for the strategic review in Seoul, and I promise you, he did not authorize a stranger with a bag to walk into a closed cabin. She flicked 2 fingers at Grant. She's stalling. Move her. Grant's hand came to Cecilia's upper arm. Not a grab yet. A wait. A suggestion of a grab, the fingers finding the seam of the coat and the arm beneath it. Come on now, he said, low, almost kind. The kindness of a man who has removed 100 people and never once thought about them after. Cecilia did not pull away. She turned her wrist so the case swung a degree toward her body, out of the line of his reach, and she looked past Madison up the stairs to the open door, and then higher, to the top of the stairs where a second figure had come out of the cabin and stopped on the small platform to watch. Richard Halston stood at the rail in a navy pinstripe suit, one hand resting on the metal, an unlit expression on a square gray face. He had a phone in his other hand, and he was not using it. He was watching. He had been watching, Cecilia understood, since before Grant reached the wing. The scene had been running in front of him, and he had stood at the top of it with a phone in his hand and done nothing. And now his eyes met hers across the drop of the stairs, and still he did nothing. "Sir," Cecilia called up to him. "Level. Professional." The voice she used across an OR. "I'm consulting medical for this flight. This case has to board. Please confirm the manifest." Richard's gaze moved off her and went to his daughter, and something passed between them that was not words, that was older than words, a whole history of permissions granted and withheld, compressed into a quarter second of eye contact. Then he looked back down at Cecilia, and he tipped his head half an inch toward the fence, and he did not say a single thing. That was the permission. Not a command, a tilt of the head. He turned back into the cabin doorway, unhurried, and put the phone to his ear, as if the woman below had already stopped existing. "You heard him," Madison said. He had not said anything, but she had, and now the thing on Cecilia's arm became a grab. Grant closed his hand and turned her, using her own weight, a practiced quarter rotation that took her a full step off her line, toward the open apron and the fence beyond it. Her heel caught a seam in the concrete, and she came down hard on the side of her foot, and the case swung wide. The case, her voice sharpened for the first time. "Do not touch the case. Then carry it and walk," Grant said. "You don't understand what's in it." She got her foot back under her and pulled her weight to a stop, forcing him to either drag her or halt, and he halted, because dragging a screaming woman across a private apron in front of the tower was a report he did not want to write. There are 2 auto-injectors in this case. There is a sealed vial. If you drop it, if the seal breaks, that medication is gone, and the person who needs it does not get it. Do you hear me? Do not touch the case. For 1 second she saw it work. Grant's eyes went to the black case, and a flicker of the careful thing that lived under all that muscle came up. The part of him that had been trained to notice the words medication and injector and think consequence. Then Madison stepped in. "Oh my God," she said. "It's a bag." She came off the stairs and crossed to them and put herself between Cecilia and the aircraft, close enough that Cecilia could smell the sweetness of her perfume over the kerosene. "It's a bag with a story attached. Every grifter who tries to walk onto a jet has a story. Last month, it was a courier with confidential documents. Before that, it was a woman who said she was the pilot's wife." She reached out and flicked the top of the case with one manicured nail, a small contemptuous tap, and Cecilia felt it go through her hand like a struck bell. "It's medication," Madison said, mocking the word. "For the passenger. Who you can't name. On a manifest you're not on." "Ma'am," Grant said to Madison, and there was the smallest hedge in it now. "If there's meds in there, there's a hairbrush and a change of clothes, and whatever she thinks makes her important." Madison did not look at him. She looked at Cecilia, and her voice dropped into something quieter and worse. "You people always think the bag makes you somebody. Put it down or take it with you. I don't care, but you are not getting on this aircraft, and every second you stand here, you are embarrassing yourself in front of men who are going to talk about it in the crew room for a week." "You people," the 2 words landed, and Cecilia felt them land, felt the old cold clarity come up in her, the way it came up in a code, when the noise of a room fell away and left only the next correct action. She did not raise her voice. Raising her voice was what the woman wanted, was the confirmation of the story Madison had already written, and Cecilia would not sign it. "I'm going to say this once more, clearly, so the record is clean," Cecilia said. "My name is on the medical services agreement for this operation. This case contains prescription cardiac medication for a passenger on this flight. If that medication does not board, the responsibility for what follows sits with the people who kept it off. I'm not asking to be liked. I'm telling you what's in my hand and what it's for. Now step back from the case." Madison's smile did not move, but her eyes did. Something went across them. Not doubt. Madison did not do doubt, but calculation. The quick math of a person deciding whether the woman in front of her was a problem that would cost her anything. She decided it would not. "Grant," she said. "The fence." He took the arm again. This time there was no kindness in the grip and no hedge in his weight. He turned her a full half circle and started her walking, and Cecilia went, because the alternative was to be dragged, and to be dragged was to hand them the picture. She walked with her spine straight, and the case held high against her ribs, where his free hand could not reach it, her heels finding the concrete in the same clean rhythm they had found it on the way in, and she did not look back at the stairs. She looked at the men. The ground crew had stopped working. A fuel tech stood with the bonding cable slack in his glove. 2 attendants had come to the cabin door and gone still there, and one of them, the younger one, had her hand over her mouth. A baggage handler by the belt loader had set down a case and was watching with the flat, unreadable face of a man who has learned that seeing things is dangerous. None of them moved. None of them spoke. The whole apron had become an audience, and Cecilia walked through the center of it, holding a bag of medicine that could keep a man's heart beating, being escorted off his aircraft by a security guard on his own payroll, while his business partner watched from the top of the stairs, and his partner's daughter narrated. "Keep moving," Grant said. "You're going to remember this," Cecilia said. Not a threat. She did not have the voice for a threat, and she did not want one. She said it the way she read a chart. "Not because of me, because of what's in the bag." He did not answer. He walked her past the wing, past the shadow of the tail, out toward the painted line where the secure apron gave way to the taxi lane, and the wind came full across the open ground and pushed at the coat and pushed at her hair, and she let it and kept walking. Behind her, at the top of the stairs, Richard Halston lowered the phone from his ear. He had not made a call. He had watched the entire thing over the top of a dead handset, and now he turned it face down in his palm and stepped back through the cabin door out of the wind. And the last thing he saw before the doorframe took the scene away from him was the doctor's straight back and the black case riding high against her side, and he thought, for exactly as long as it took to think it and no longer, that the woman had not once raised her voice, and that people who did not raise their voices were sometimes the ones you had to worry about. Then he sat down in the wide leather seat facing forward, and he told himself it was handled, and he was wrong. At the line, Grant stopped. He let go of her arm. He stepped back and put his hands loosely at his belt and jerked his chin toward the low glass building past the fence. "Public terminals through there. You can wait for whatever you came in on." Cecilia set her feet. She turned to face him, and she looked at him long enough that he shifted his weight. "What's your name?" she said. "Terminals that way, ma'am." "I asked your name." He held it a second, the way she had held the passenger's name, and for the same reason, because a name is a thing that ties you to a thing. Then he gave it, because he was a man who followed the chain of command, and the chain had told him to remove her, not to hide from her. "Whitaker." "Whitaker," she said it once, filed it. "When they ask you later who told you to put your hands on medical equipment for a cardiac patient, I want you to be able to say it was the woman on the stairs and the man at the top of them, and not you. So I'm telling you now, on the record, in front of the tower cameras behind you, I identified the contents. I identified the risk. You were told, and you did it anyway. That's yours now too. I'd fix that if I were you." She lifted the case an inch. "Before this flight lands." "And a for a 9? Something moved behind his eyes. Not fear. Whitaker did not fear a woman with a bag, but the specific cold recognition of a man who has spent 30 years reading which orders come back on the person who followed them, and who has just been handed, in plain, quiet sentences, the shape of exactly that kind of order. He looked back at the jet. The stairs were empty now. The door was closing. "Wait here," he said, and it came out before he had decided to say it. For what? But he had already turned, already keyed the radio on his shoulder, already started back across the apron, at a pace that was not quite a walk, and Cecilia stood alone at the painted line with the wind in her hair and the case against her ribs, and watched him go, and she did not follow, and she did not run, and she did not cry, and she did not do any of the things the woman in white had built her whole small performance expecting her to do. She took out her phone. She checked the time. 7:14. Wheels Up was set for 8. She looked at the closed cabin door across the apron, and she did the arithmetic she had been doing since 4 in the morning. The injector at the top of the case. The sealed vial beneath it. The doses on the handwritten card. The number of minutes a heart could go wrong at altitude, with no one on board who knew the difference between a bad reading and a fatal one, and the arithmetic came out the way it always came out, and it was not about her pride at all. She lifted the phone and she typed 4 words to the only number in that whole cold field that would understand them, and she did not sign her name, because he had told her a year ago that they would keep her name, and she was going to hold him to it. They took me off the jet. The message showed delivered. Then, a heartbeat later, it showed read. And across the apron, inside the closing aircraft, in a seat that faced the rear where no one had thought to look, a man in a charcoal suit turned a platinum watch a quarter turn on his wrist, read the 4 words twice, and went very still. The platinum watch stopped turning. Do-yoon stood, and the seat that faced the rear released him into an aisle no one else had watched. He crossed to the window on the port side, the one that gave him the apron and the painted line, and the woman standing on it with a black case held against her ribs. He looked for 3 seconds. Then he moved toward the door. Richard heard the footsteps before he placed them. He half rose from the forward chair, a host's smile already loading. "We're set to close up," he said. Ground had a small. "Open it." 2 words, flat, and Richard's smile lost a corner. A flight attendant reached the handle first. The door broke its seal, and the morning came in cold off the tarmac. Do-yoon went down the stairs without touching the rail. He did not look at Madison, who had turned at the sound and arranged her face into something bright. He walked past the fuel tech, past the baggage handler who had stopped mid-lift, past the 2 attendants frozen at the base of the steps. His eyes stayed on one point across the apron until he reached it. He stopped in front of Cecilia, close enough to speak low. What happened? Not to Madison, not to the crew, to her. The apron heard the direction of the question and understood something it could not yet name. Cecilia kept her voice level. "A woman decided I wasn't on the manifest. Security walked me to the fence." She adjusted the case a half-inch higher against her ribs. "I told them not to touch this. It has your injectors and a sealed vial. The seal is intact. I checked." He looked at the case. He looked at her hand on the case. "And you're all right. I'm standing here." "That's not what I asked." "I'm all right." Something moved behind his eyes and settled. He turned his head a fraction, not toward Madison, toward the space just past his own shoulder, and said a name at conversational volume. Jin-woo. The man had already crossed half the distance. He came from the direction of the second aircraft, gray blazer over a black collar, a tablet in one gloved hand, and a bud in his ear. He stopped at Do-yoon's side and waited without a word, the way a man waits who has learned that his principal says things once. "The medical services agreement," Do-yoon said. "Dr. Rose, who authorized her removal from the aircraft?" Jin-woo's thumb moved on the glass, pulling the ground log now. Madison arrived then, heels quick on the paint, the trench catching air behind her. "I can explain this," she said, and she said it to Do-yoon, the way people speak to men they have decided to charm. "There was a mix-up with staffing. She wasn't on my copy of your copy. The manifest I was sent this morning. Catering, 2 attendants, ground. No physician." She produced a laugh, thin and rehearsed. "I acted on the document I had. Anyone would." Dion looked at her for the first time. The look was not hostile. That was the part she would think about later. It was the look a man gives a chair he is deciding whether to move. You acted on a document, he said. She told you what was in the case. You were told, and you continued. She's staff. Staff doesn't dictate what happens on. Jinwoo. Sir. Jinwoo did not lift his eyes from the tablet. Ground log. Removal called at 7:09. Requested by Ms. Halston. Executed by Whitaker. Terminal security. A pause the length of a breath. Tower cameras confirm. Angle 2 has the stairs. Angle 2, Doyun said. What's on the stairs? Jinwoo turned the tablet a quarter, so his principal could see. He kept his face empty. Mr. Halston, top of the steps. Phone in his hand, no active call. He watches the removal for 11 seconds. He gives a nod toward the fence. Then he goes back inside. The apron had gone very quiet. Even the wind seemed to be holding for the next line. Doyun did not raise his voice. He never did. The whole airfield would remember that. He said, he saw it, and he let it run. That's not. Richard had come down 2 steps, no further, one hand riding the rail he had refused. Han, that's a wild reading of a camera. I glanced at a commotion on my own jet, and I trusted my people to handle it. That is the entire content of that clip. Your people. Doyun turned the 2 words over like coins. Your daughter ordered it. Your security carried it out. Your nod released it. Which of those isn't yours? Richard's jaw worked. Behind him, in the doorway, Madison had stopped talking, which she almost never did. Cecilia stood through all of it with the case against her ribs, and her weight even on both nude scarpins, and she watched the men rearrange the ground under themselves, without her having to lift a hand. It should have felt like vindication. It felt, instead, like a door she had spent a year holding shut, beginning to swing. Doyun. She said his name low, only for him, the first time she had used it in the open air of this place. Whatever you're about to do it clean. He heard her. He gave the smallest tilt of his head that meant he had. Then he faced Jinwoo again, and the register of his voice changed. Not louder, only final, the tone that closes accounts. The Joint Fleet, he said. Every tail number under the Halston-Han operating agreement. Ground them. Jinwoo's thumb hovered. Not hesitation, confirmation. All of them. All of them. Effective now. Nothing lifts. Not this aircraft, not Seoul, not the 2 in the second hangar, not anything with both our marks on the certificate. Hold them where they sit. Han. Richard came down the last steps fast now. The host gone, the partner surfacing. You cannot unilaterally ground a shared fleet over a curbside misunderstanding. There are crews on the clock. There's a strategic review in Seoul at end of day. There are people expecting those aircraft. Then they'll be disappointed. Do you understand what a full ground stop costs? Per hour? Across a dual flag operation? I understand exactly what it costs, Doyun said. That's why it means something. Jinwoo was already speaking into the bud, quiet and quick, a string of tail numbers and a single word repeated. Hold, hold, hold. Across the apron, a fuel truck that had begun to roll toward the second jet slowed and stopped. A tug operator killed his engine without being told twice. On the far taxiway, a set of nav lights that had been cycling for departure went dark. The airfield began, aircraft by aircraft, to stop breathing. This is insane, Madison said. To no one. To everyone. Over a case of pills? Doyun looked at her again. Same chair look. You still think this is about the case, isn't it? You're shutting down millions of dollars of... It's about who saw and who allowed. He said it without heat, which was worse than heat. Your father watched a doctor get walked to a fence and decided that was acceptable on an aircraft that carries my name. If that judgment is on the manifest, I want to know what else is. The word manifest did something to Richard's face. It was small and he covered it fast, but Cecilia caught it, because she had spent a year learning to read the men who wore charm like a coat. and she filed it without knowing yet what it meant. Jinwoo lowered the tablet. Fleet's holding, sir. All tails acknowledged. Crews are standing down. Towers asking for a reason code. Give them mine, Doyoon said. Operator's discretion. Safety and integrity of the operating agreement. They'll want it in writing before end of day. They'll have it before end of day. In writing, with my signature, and a copy to council. He paused. And Jinwoo. Pull everything the ground stop touches. Crew rosters, load sheets, the movement logs for the last 90 days on every shared tail. If we're not flying, we're reading. Understood. A beat. How far back on the financials? Doyoon's eyes moved, once, to Richard, and away. As far as the paper goes. Richard made a sound that wanted to be a laugh. Now it's an audit, from a curb incident to an audit of my books in 90 seconds. Do you hear how this sounds? I hear how you sound, Doyoon said. You've objected to the ground stop 3 times. You haven't asked once whether she's all right. The line landed in the open and stayed there. Richard's mouth opened and found nothing in it. Madison looked at her father, and for the first time that morning, something uncertain crossed the polished front. A hairline in the glass. Cecilia broke it. She had to. The men would have circled the same drain for another 5 minutes, and she was still the only person on the apron who knew what was actually in the case, and what it was for. The medication needs to come off the aircraft if the aircraft isn't moving, she said. Practical, clinical, the voice she used at bedsides. It shouldn't sit in an unpressurized hold in the cold. If the fleet's grounded, I take it back with me. Or it goes into climate storage with a chain of custody note. Your call. Doyoon looked at her, and for a half-second, the airfield and the fleet and the man on the steps all went out of his face, and there was only the thing between them that neither of them named in public. It comes with you, he said. Everything comes with you. Then I need someone to sign that I removed it intact. For the record. She turned her head a precise few degrees. Mr. Whitaker can sign it. He was the one told what it was. Whitaker had come back onto the apron at some point in the last minute, drawn by the stopping of the machines, and he stood now at the edge of the group with his radio silent on his shoulder and the look of a man who has realized which side of a line he is standing on. He glanced at Doyoon. He glanced at the tablet in Jinwoo's hand that he could not read but could guess. He took a breath. I'll sign it, Whitaker said. I was told. I did it anyway. That's on the paper too, if it needs to be. It needs to be, Jinwoo said, not unkindly, and made a note. Richard tried once more, and this time he pitched it low, partner to partner, the register of the back room. Han, walk with me. 2 minutes. Whatever you think you saw on that camera, there's a version of this morning where none of us blows up a strategic review over a staffing error and a misunderstanding on a ramp. Let me give you that version. Over a drink. Tonight. Doyoon considered him. The consideration itself was an insult. Both men knew it. There's no version where the aircraft fly today, he said. You should call Seoul. Tell them the review is postponed. Tell them the operator grounded the fleet. A pause, waited. Tell them why, if you like. I'd be curious which reason you give. Richard's jaw set. He did not take the walk. He turned and went back up the stairs, slower than he had come down, and at the top he stopped and looked back once at the woman on the painted line. Really looked, for the first time, as if recalculating a number he had entered wrong. Then he stepped inside, and the doorway held only Madison, who no longer looked bright at all. Ms. Halston, Jinwoo's voice, even. The tower will need a statement from you regarding the 709 call, at your convenience today. I don't answer to security, Madison said, but the words came out with less than half their morning's force. No, Jinwoo agreed. You answer to the audit. She had no reply for that. She turned on the beige stilettos and went up the steps after her father, and the apron watched her go the way it had watched Cecilia walk to the fence an hour before, except no one held her arm, and no one needed to, because the thing walking her off was larger than a hand. Do-yoon waited until the door of the jet closed. Then he turned back to Cecilia, and the whole register of him softened by a degree that only she would have registered. "You should sit," he said. "You've been on your feet on cold concrete for an hour." "I've stood longer for less." But she let the case come down off her ribs at last, let her arm remember its own weight. "You grounded the entire operation, Do-yoon. Over me, not over you." He said it carefully, because it mattered that she believe the true version and not the flattering one. "Because of what letting it happen tells me about the man I signed a fleet with. You were the thing I could see. I'm grounding it for the things I can't. Yet." She held his eyes. "And when they ask you tonight why the jets aren't flying, what do you say? Do you say a woman was walked to a fence? I say, the operator lost confidence in the integrity of the operation." A pause. "The woman is not for their record. The woman is mine, on the terms she set. We keep your name." Neither of them said it. It sat in the cold air between them, intact, the way the seal on the vial was intact, the way certain things stay whole, precisely because they are never handled in public. Jinwoo stepped in with the tablet angled down. "Sir, first pass on the 90-day movement logs is loading. There's—" He stopped, chose his words the way he chose his footing. "There's a pattern in the shared tail routing I'd want to look at properly before I characterize it. 2 aircraft filing for the same corridor, same window, different cargo manifests, repeatedly." Do-yoon's attention sharpened to a point. "Aero Vantage?" The names in the routing notes. Jinwoo did not look up. "Aero Vantage Asia," more than once. On the Halston side load sheets, not ours. For a moment, Do-yoon said nothing at all. The apron sat still around him. 40 tons of grounded aircraft in every direction, and the man who had stopped a fleet with 2 words stood turning over a name he had heard in boardrooms and never once in a hangar log. "Read all of it," he said finally. "Every tale, 90 days back, and further if the paper goes further. I want to know why a company we're supposedly courting is already riding in the belly of aircraft that carry my mark." "That'll take the day," Jinwoo said. "Maybe 2. We're not flying. We have the day." He glanced at Cecilia, then back. "Set up in the second hangar. Quiet. Nothing leaves that room until I've seen it." Jinwoo nodded and moved off, already speaking into the bud, and the fleet stayed frozen on the concrete under a thin morning sun, and somewhere in a load sheet 90 days deep, a name that should not have been there waited to be found. Cecilia looked at the case in her hand, then at the man beside her, then at the closed door of the jet, where a father and a daughter sat inside an aircraft that would not move. "You think it's bigger than this morning," she said. Not a question. Do-yoon watched the hangar door where Jinwoo had gone. "This morning was the loose thread," he said. "I only pulled it because they put their hands on you." He held out his hand for the case. She gave it to him, not because she needed to, but because for 1 second on a stopped airfield, she let herself hand something to someone. He took it, checked the seal with a thumb the way she had taught him to a year ago in a dark apartment, and gave the smallest nod. "Intact," he said. "I told you." "You did." He looked at her. "You always tell me. That's the whole point of you." Across the apron, a tower light blinked once and stayed dark. Nothing lifted. Nothing would. Not today. And in the second hangar, a tablet was already filling with 90 days of paper that someone had been very careful to keep folded and had never once imagined would be opened by the woman they threw off the jet. The second hangar smelled of cold concrete and machine oil, and Jinwoo had already turned it into something that was not a hangar anymore. 2 folding tables stood end to end under the work lights, 3 laptops, a portable printer that fed paper in a thin, steady stream. He worked without looking up, and he did not slow when Do-yoon came through the side door with Cecilia half a step behind him. "Talk to me," Do-yoon said. 90 days pulls clean off the servers. Jinwoo tapped one screen. "The problem isn't finding the records. The problem is that there are 2 of everything." Cecilia set the medical case down on the empty end of the table, out of the paper's path, and stepped closer to read over Jinwoo's shoulder. She said nothing. She had learned, in a year of watching men explain themselves, that the first version was never the true one, and that the true one showed up when nobody was performing. Jinwoo dragged 2 windows side by side, same tail number, same corridor, same day, February 11. He pointed. "Load sheet A says avionics components, sealed crates, 1,200 kilos, consigned to Han Meridian, receiving in Seoul." His finger moved right. "Load sheet A, same flight, says the same 1,200 kilos went to a warehouse in Incheon that Han Meridian does not lease." Whose warehouse? Aero Vantage Asia. Jinwoo let the name sit. "It's on the Halston paperwork. It is not on ours." Do-yoon pulled a chair out and sat without taking his eyes off the screen. That was the tell, if anyone had been reading him. He stood when a thing could still be handled standing. He sat when it could not. "One flight is a mistake," he said. "It's not one flight." Jinwoo fanned a printed stack across the table, and each sheet had 2 twins clipped behind it. "It's every shared tail that flew the Asia corridor since March. Cargo booked once under Meridian, invoiced twice, delivered to an address that isn't ours. Somebody has been running our aircraft as a private freight line and letting the operating agreement pay the fuel." Cecilia picked up one of the paired sheets. She read the top one, then the twin behind it, then the top one again. Her thumb found the discrepancy without being told where to look. A consignee line, 1 word different, 1 address different, everything else photocopied down to the timestamp. "These are the same document," she said. "They're supposed to be." "No." She laid it flat and turned it so Do-yoon could see. Someone made a copy, changed 1 field, and filed both. Same font, same alignment. The second one was built from the first. She looked up. "That isn't sloppy. That's careful. Sloppy leaves 2 different documents. Careful leaves twins." Yun looked at her for a moment longer than the sheet required. Then he looked back at the paper. "How much?" he said. Yun Woo pulled a 4th window. A ledger, columns of freight charges, a running total at the bottom that kept climbing as he scrolled. Per corridor run, the double invoice clears about 40,000. There have been 31 runs I can match so far. I have not matched all of them. The printer coughed out another page. Nobody reached for it. "That's the freight," Jinwoo said. "The freight is the small number." Do-yoon's jaw shifted. "Give me the big one." "I can't. Not yet." Jinwoo took his glasses off, wiped them on the hem of his turtleneck, put them back. It was the only nervous thing his body did. The freight double billing shows up because the load sheets are physical. Pilots sign them, ground signs them. They exist in 2 places. But the freight isn't why someone would take the risk of touching a shared fleet. 40,000 a run doesn't move a man like Halston. He spills more than that on a bad quarter and doesn't notice. Then why? Because the flights aren't the point, the flights are the cover. Jinwoo turned the laptop fully toward Do-yoon. Every one of these corridor runs is booked against a project code. Same code, every time. I ran the code back through the joint accounts. He tapped enter. A payment schedule opened. Not freight. Wire transfers. 7 figures each, staggered, quarterly, drawn against a line of credit that carried both the Halston name and the Han name, at the top of the page. That's the operating reserve, Do-yun said. That's our joint capital. Yes. Where is it going? Aero Vantage Asia. Jin-woo did not soften it. The same shell that's receiving the freight is receiving the money. The flights make the shell look like a real logistics company with real cargo moving through it. Cargo in, capital in, and on paper, it all looks like the joint venture spending money to build out an Asia operation. Cecilia set the paired sheet down very slowly. She had stopped being a bystander somewhere in the last minute. Her voice came flat and clinical, the voice she used to read a chart back to a family who did not want to hear it. It's not building anything, she said. It's draining. The freight is theater, so nobody asks why the money's moving. Jin-woo looked at her, then at Do-yun, and inclined his head half an inch, confirmation without a word. Do-yun stood up. He walked 3 steps to the hangar wall and stopped there, one hand flat against the cold metal, his back to both of them. The koi at his collar rose and held as he breathed. He stayed that way long enough that Jin-woo went back to the keyboard rather than watch. How long has it been running? Do-yun said to the wall. The pattern I can prove starts in March, but March is where the double load sheets start showing up. The project code is older. Keys clicked. The code was opened 14 months ago. Cecilia's hand stilled on the table. 14 months. She did the arithmetic before she chose to, the way she always did, and the number landed somewhere under her ribs. 14 months ago, she had signed the medical services agreement. 14 months ago, she had signed the medical services agreement. 14 months ago, she had signed the medical services agreement. 14 months ago, she had signed the medical services agreement. 14 months ago, she had signed the medical services agreement and started building a case, prescription by prescription. 14 months ago, the two of them had begun keeping her name separate, so the world could not reduce her to a thing on a rich man's arm. And in the same season, in the same rooms, someone had opened a code and started quietly hollowing out the venture from inside. She did not say any of that. She said, "You were being robbed the whole time you thought you were being partnered with." Do-yun turned around. Something had changed in his face, and it was not anger. Anger she had seen on him. Anger was the ground stop, the clean, cold order that killed a fleet in one sentence. This was slower and worse. This was a man revising a year of his own memory in real time, going back through every handshake and every dinner, and finding a second meaning behind each one. "He shook my hand in Busan," Do-yun said. "In June. We signed the Asia expansion in June." He said it quietly, to no one. He toasted it. "June is inside the pattern," Jin-woo said. Do-yun came back to the table. He picked up one of the twinned load sheets, held it under the work light, and read it the way Cecilia had read it. Top sheet, twin, top sheet. His thumb found the changed field. He did not need her to point. "The thing on the tarmac this morning," he said. "The woman thrown off the jet." He set the sheet down. "That's the same hand." Cecilia went still. "You said it was a small thing," she said carefully. "You said you grounded the fleet because of what it revealed about your partner, not because of me." "I did say that." He met her eyes. "I was half right." He tapped the paper. The insult was small, but the reflex behind it wasn't. "Whoever did this," he moved his hand across the fanned sheets, "has spent 14 months being certain that nobody was looking. That certainty is a habit. This morning it walked out onto the apron and put its hands on the wrong person because it had stopped believing anyone at that airfield had power it needed to respect." He looked at her, and for a moment, the clinician and the man both went quiet in the room. "They didn't get careful until they got caught," he said. "They got careless because they were never caught. The humiliation was the loose thread. I only pulled it because they wrapped it around your wrist." Cecilia held his gaze and did not let her face move. because if it moved, she would have to decide what she felt, and there was not room in this hangar for what she felt. The printer stopped. Jinwoo held up a hand, listening to the bud in his ear. "Tower," he said. "They want a written reason code before the shift change, or they escalate to the authority." He glanced at Do-yun, and Halston's counsel just called the ops desk, asking on what grounds a partner can ground jointly owned aircraft. "Tell counsel the grounds are in progress, and will be delivered in writing with my signature, as promised." Do-yun's voice had gone level again, the surface closing back over the water. "Tell the tower operators discretion, safety, and integrity of the operating agreement. Same code as this morning. Nothing changes until I've seen everything. Copy." Jinwoo spoke low into the bud, then set it aside and pulled a fresh laptop toward him. "There's more. You'll want to sit for this one too." Do-yun did not sit. He put both hands on the edge of the table and leaned over the screen. "The Aero Vantage shell isn't dormant," Jinwoo said. "It has a live acquisition file. There's a purchase agreement in draft. Aero Vantage Asia buying out a mid-market carrier's Asia routes and hangar slots. Big. The kind of deal that would give whoever owns Aero Vantage a licensed, operating footprint across the whole corridor." He scrolled. "The financing for that purchase is being assembled right now, and the collateral being pledged against it is ours," Do-yun finished. "Is the joint ventures, capital, infrastructure, the Asia access that only exists because of the Han name." Jinwoo stopped scrolling. "Someone is using your side of the partnership to fund the purchase of an asset they intend to hold privately. The venture pays. The venture takes the risk, and when it closes, the routes belong to Aero Vantage." Cecilia watched Do-yun's hands on the table edge. The knuckles paled and then, deliberately, released. He was choosing, in front of her, not to break the thing he was holding. "Who signs for Aero Vantage?" he said. Jinwoo's fingers hovered. "That's the wall I keep hitting. The shell is layered. Nominees, a trust, a management company in Singapore. Every signature so far is a proxy." He shook his head once. "I can prove the money moved. I can prove the flights are fake. I can prove the acquisition is being funded off your collateral. I cannot yet prove whose name is at the bottom of it. Not on paper, not the way you'll need it to hold." "How long? To break the shell? A day, maybe 2. I have to walk it through 3 jurisdictions, and I have to do it without tipping anyone that we're inside." Jinwoo looked up. "The moment they know how deep the audit goes, the draft acquisition either closes fast or disappears. Right now, they think this is about a rude morning and a grounded jet. That's our cover. As long as they think you grounded the fleet over the woman on the tarmac, they'll underestimate what you're actually reading." The words hung there. Cecilia turned her head slowly toward Jinwoo, then toward Do-yun. She had been the cover for their secret for 14 months. Now she was the cover for the audit, the morning's insult, the thing that had reduced her to nothing in front of a whole ground crew, had become the single most useful misdirection in the building. The people upstairs in the parked jet believed this was a tantrum over a slighted employee. That belief was buying Jinwoo the hours he needed. She should have found that satisfying. Instead, something cold moved through her, because she understood, standing in that hangar, that her humiliation had value to this operation, and that value was a kind of trap of its own. "So I stay small," she said. Do-yun looked at her sharply. "What?" "You heard him. As long as they think this is about a woman who got thrown off a jet, they don't run." She kept her voice even. "The whole thing works because they still think I'm nobody. If they knew who I was, if they knew what I am to you, they'd know how hard you'd actually look. So I stay nobody. That's the plan you're both nodding at." Jinwoo had the grace to stop typing. Do-yun straightened. "No one is asking you to." "You're not asking. That's my point." She was not angry. She was precise, which was worse. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's good tradecraft. It's smart. Keep the audit quiet. Keep me quiet. Let them keep believing what they already believe. She picked her words like instruments off a tray. I'm only saying that we should both be honest, that my name being invisible stopped being about protecting me an hour ago. Now it's protecting the case. The hangar was quiet, except for the printer's fan. Do-yoon did not argue with her. That was the thing she would remember later, when it mattered, that he did not argue. He held her eyes and let the true thing stand between them without dressing it up. Both can be true, he said finally. I know. She turned back to the table and squared the fanned sheets into a stack, an old habit, order under her hands. That's what makes it hard. Jin-woo's bud crackled. He listened, and this time his square face did something it had not done all morning. It tightened. Say again, he said into the mic. Then, to Do-yoon, the parked jet just requested a tug and a fuel top-off. Halston's crew is asking ground when they can expect a release window. There is no release window. They know that. They're not really asking about the jet. Jin-woo set the tablet down. They're testing whether the ground stop has teeth or whether it was theater. If a tug rolls, they'll know you flinched. If nothing moves, they'll start to wonder what you're actually doing in the second hangar for 3 hours over a staffing dispute. Do-yoon considered it. Cecilia watched him weigh 2 bad boards against each other, and she saw the exact second he chose. Roll nothing, he said. Let them wonder. A man who wonders makes calls. I want to see who Halston calls when he's nervous. He turned to Jin-woo. Put a watch on the shell's activity. The moment anyone touches that acquisition draft, opens it, edits it, tries to accelerate the close, I want to know inside the minute. If they move to close early, they've told us they're scared. And scared tells us how much there is to be scared of. On it. Jin-woo's hands were already moving. Do-yoon crossed to the end of the table where the medical case sat. He rested 2 fingers on its top, not opening it, and for a moment the operator went out of his face, and something plainer took its place. You built this over 14 months, he said to Cecilia, quietly, of the case. 1 prescription at a time, careful, because you thought the danger was going to be my heart. It might still be. It might. His fingers stayed on the case. But the thing that's actually been running for 14 months wasn't in your bag. He looked up at her. It was at my dinner table. The printer fed out a final sheet and went silent. Jin-woo lifted it, scanned it, and his shoulders changed. Do-yoon. He rarely used the name without the rest of it. The project code. The 14-month-old one. He turned the page around. It wasn't opened by the venture. It was opened by a single principal, on the Halston side, and backdated into the joint books, so it would read as a partnership initiative. He set the page down. 1 name authorized it. It's the only real signature I've found in the whole structure. Everything else is proxies. This one they couldn't fake, because the code needed a principal to birth it. Do-yoon did not reach for the page. He looked at Cecilia first. 1 beat, the length of a held breath, and then he looked down at the name. Outside, across 200 yards of frozen apron, the parked jet sat with its door shut and its stairs still down, and inside it, a man in a pinstripe suit checked his phone for the 4th time and found, again, that no tug was coming for him. The council arrived before the coffee did. 2 black sedans rolled through the service gate and stopped nose to tail outside the second hangar, and out of them came men in gray suits carrying slim briefcases, and behind them, in a camel overcoat, walked Richard Halston, no longer testing whether the ground stop had teeth. He had felt the teeth. Now he had brought lawyers. Do-yoon watched them cross the apron through the hangar's open mouth. He set the audit page face down on the table. They want a room, he said. Jinwoo tilted his head at his earpiece. They're asking for one. Halston's council. 2 of them. And a woman from the tower. She wants the reason code signed before the shift change. He looked up. They're already inside the north door. Cecilia stood at the end of the long table with the medical case beside her forearm. She had been reading load sheets for 3 hours. She reached down without looking and touched the top of the case, the flat of 2 fingers, the way she checked it in airports, and then she straightened. I should step out. No, Do-yoon said. I'm not on this, she said. I'm on the manifest. If they see me in the audit room, it hands them a story. The doctor who got thrown off the jet is running the investigation. That's the headline they want. You're not running anything they get to see. That's not how they'll say it. He didn't answer because the north door was already opening and the gray suits were already spilling into the light, and Richard Halston was already looking for a face to fix his composure on. He found Do-yoon. He did not find Cecilia. Not yet. He swept past her the way a man sweeps past a lamp. The lead lawyer set his briefcase on the table without asking. Mr. Han, we'd like to understand the basis for a fleet-wide ground order that's costing this partnership roughly $90,000 an hour. You'll have it in writing before the shift change, Do-yoon said, as promised to the tower. We'd like it now. Then you'll wait an hour. The lawyer's jaw moved. He glanced at the table, at the drifts of printout, at the 3 laptops, and his eyes did the arithmetic that lawyers do, that this was not a staffing complaint, that this was a discovery operation, that somebody had already pulled the thread and was standing in the middle of the spool. He set that face away. We're also here about a personnel matter. This morning, a woman without credentials attempted to board a secured aircraft and misrepresented herself as medical staff. My client acted within his rights to remove a security risk. If that removal is being used as pretext for, say her name, Do-yoon said. The lawyer stopped. I'm sorry? The woman without credentials. Say her name. The lawyer looked at Richard. Richard looked at the table. Neither of them had it. They had removed her, permitted her removal, watched her walk across 200 yards of frozen apron, and they had never once needed her name, because a name is a thing you give to people who count. Cecilia felt the room tilt toward her. She had spent a year making herself into furniture in exactly these rooms. The consultant who signed in as Dr. Rose, who sat where the medical liaison sat, who never let the 2 lives touch. She had built the invisibility with her own hands, and she watched Do-yoon reach for it now and start to tear it down, and she knew, 1 full second before he spoke, exactly what he was about to do. Don't, she said, quiet, only for him. He said it anyway. Her name is Dr. Cecilia Rose. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. She holds a doctorate in cardiology. She has been under contract to this operation's medical services agreement for 14 months. She built the emergency protocol your flight crews carry. And she is the person I trust with my life, in the literal sense. On every flight this fleet has ever flown. A beat, including mine. The room did not gasp. Rooms like this never gasp. The lawyer's pen stopped. The second lawyer glanced at his colleague. Richard Halston lifted his eyes from the table for the first time, and something crossed his face. Not shame, Cecilia noted, filing it the way she filed everything. Recalculation. He was already turning the reveal into a lever. She could see him find the handle. So this is personal, the lead lawyer said, slow, tasting it. The ground order, the audit, all of it, because Mr. Han's companion had a disagreement with ground crew. No, Do-yoon said. That's certainly how it reads. That's how you'll write it. It's not what it is. But it was too late, and Cecilia knew it was too late, because the thing about a reveal is that it belongs to everyone the instant it leaves your mouth. and she had not been the one to open her mouth. She stood very straight. She kept her face composed. Inside, the floor was going out from under the year she had built. The lawyer turned to her, and now he was polite. Now he saw her, and the seeing was worse than the not seeing. "Doctor, forgive me. Had we known your relationship to Mr. Hahn, this morning would have gone very differently." "I'm aware," she said. "Of course, it does put the ground order in a certain light. I'm aware of that too." She did not look at Do-yoon. If she looked at him, she would say it in front of the lawyers, and she would not give them that. She picked up the medical case by its handle, and she walked out the north door into the cold, past the sedans, past the tower woman waiting with her clipboard and her signature line, out onto the apron, where the parked jet still sat with its stairs down and its cabin empty of everyone who had thought she was nobody. He came after her. Of course he came after her. Cecilia? She turned on the painted line, the same painted line, and the geometry of it was not lost on her, thrown to the fence in the morning by people who despised her, and now standing on the same paint, undone by the one person who loved her. "You said my name. I protected you. You spent me." The word came out flat, and it landed flat. "You had one thing that was mine, my name. You gave it away to buy yourself a clean answer in front of 2 lawyers. They were building a case that you're a liar and a security risk. I ended it. You ended it your way, on your timing, in your room." She set the case down on the concrete between them, deliberately, so her hands were free. "Do you know what happens now? By tonight, every person in that hangar knows the doctor is the boss's woman. By tomorrow, the medical services agreement isn't a contract I earned. It's a favor you gave your girlfriend. 14 months of building that kit becomes a story about pillow talk. My doctorate becomes decoration. That's not. It is exactly that. It's the only thing I was ever afraid of. And you did it to me in a room full of lawyers. And you didn't ask." Her voice did not rise. That was the worst of it. And she knew it, and she used it. "You told me once. Then we keep your name. You made that a promise. And the first time it cost you something to keep it, you spent it instead." He stood in the cold with no overcoat, and for a moment the unreadable face was not unreadable. "They put their hands on you. And you put your hands on the one thing that was mine to protect. I couldn't watch them. You couldn't watch," she said. "That's the part. You couldn't watch, so you fixed it for me, over me, without me. Do you understand that's the same thing they did?" Richard nodded and let it run. "You spoke and let it run. Nobody asked the woman." She picked the case back up. "The difference is, I expected it from him. That reached him. She saw it reach him. He didn't reach back with words, because he was, at bottom, a man who had learned that words were expensive, and he had just learned again how expensive, and the lesson had cost her the year. Behind them, on the apron, Jin-woo had appeared in the hangar mouth, tablet in hand, and he had the sense not to come closer. He waited. There was something on the tablet. There was always something on the tablet. Cecilia saw him. "Go," she told Do-yoon. "There's more. There's always more. Go read it. This matters more." "It doesn't. That's the truth you don't want. The fraud matters more, tonight, to everyone but us, and pretending otherwise is how you get to feel like the good one." She heard the edge in it and did not soften it. "Go do your job. I'll do mine. The medication still travels with me until you have somewhere colder than a bag to put it. That hasn't changed. I'm still your doctor." "You're still." "I said your doctor." She lifted the case an inch, a small, hard punctuation. "The rest, I don't know yet. You didn't leave me the room to know." Her phone buzzed against her hip. She almost ignored it. She looked, because a doctor always looks, and the name on the screen was one she had spent a decade earning the right to: Presbyterian University Medical Center. The department chair, Dr. Aronson, who had been circling her for a fellowship track appointment for 6 months, who had left 3 warm voicemails, who had said, at a conference in October, that a cardiologist with her instrument didn't belong on a private services contract flying rich men to Seoul. She stepped away from Do-yoon to take it. She turned her back to him, which she had never done, and the turning was its own sentence. "David," she said. "Yes, I have a minute." She had a minute. She listened. She watched the tower woman come out the north door with the clipboard and hover, wanting a signature that wasn't hers to give. She listened, and she heard the temperature change in David Aronson's voice, the exact degree of it, the way a clinician hears a murmur that wasn't there last month. "I'd heard," he was saying, "that your arrangement with the aviation group is closer than a contract. Board's a cautious animal, Cecilia. Optics, a joint appointment where the candidate's primary income is, entangled with a private principal. It raises questions we'd have to answer. I'm not saying no, I'm saying the timing's gotten complicated." "It's gotten complicated since this morning," she said. A pause on the line. "These things travel fast." "They do." She kept her voice level, the level she'd used on Whitaker, the level she used when a family needed the truth without the floor giving way. "Let me ask you plainly, David. 6 months ago you told me I was wasted on a services contract. Has my instrument changed since 6 months ago?" "Cecilia, has one thing about what I can do changed? Or has one thing about who I'm seen with changed?" He didn't answer that, which was the answer. "Let's talk in a few weeks. When the dust settles." "When the dust settles," she repeated. "When it's less complicated to hire a black woman if she isn't also the boss's girlfriend." "That's not—" He stopped. To his credit, he stopped, because it was, and they both heard that it was. "I'll call you," he said, and it had the sound of a man who would not call. She put the phone in her coat pocket. She stood on the painted line with the case in her hand, and the cold going through the ivory suit she'd dressed in at dawn, when the only thing she was afraid of was still a thing in the future. It had taken less than a day. The reveal she'd feared for a year, the exact sequence, the achievement reframed as a favor, the appointment cooling, the door that had been open swinging quietly toward shut. It had all happened between one phone call and the next, and it had happened because a man who loved her had decided, for one clean minute in front of 2 lawyers, that his version of protecting her was worth more than her name. Do-yoon was still there. He had heard enough of the call to understand it. "Aronson," he said. "Don't." She didn't turn. "Do not fix this one. Do not call him. Do not ground his hospital. If you touch it, you make it his story about you, and then I really am what they'll say I am, a thing you handle." She turned now. "The only way I keep my name after today is if I'm the one who earns it back. You can't buy it for me. You already proved you'll spend it." Jin-woo, at the hangar mouth, took one step and stopped, because Cecilia had lifted her chin at him. "Say it from there," she called. "Whatever it is, I'm in this now whether I want it to be or not." He made sure of that. Jin-woo looked at Do-yoon. Do-yoon gave a small nod, and Jin-woo, from 30 feet away, across the cold concrete, said the thing that would end the day worse than it had already ended. "The watch tripped," he said. "Somebody moved on the acquisition draft 11 minutes ago, from the Halston side." He looked at the tablet, then up. "They're not slowing it down because we grounded the fleet. They're accelerating it. They're trying to close AeroVantage before we finish reading." Do-yoon went still in the particular way he went still. "And there's a filing," Jin-woo went on. "Counsel didn't come here to defend a staffing complaint. They came to serve notice. Mr. Han, Richard's counsel is petitioning to dissolve the operating agreement. Tonight. On grounds of—" He checked the screen, and his mouth did something that wasn't a smile. "On grounds of mismanagement and an unlawful ground order." They're trying to strip you of operational control before the audit closes. If they win the emergency motion, the fleet flies, the money moves, and the acquisition closes by Friday, and everything on this table becomes a grievance you filed too late. The tower woman looked from face to face, understanding none of it, wanting only her signature. Cecilia looked at the case in her hand, and the jet on the apron, and the man who had just given away the last private thing she owned to win a battle that had, in the last 11 minutes, become a war he was on the edge of losing. She did the arithmetic she always did. It came out the same each way. So it was never about the pills, she said, quiet, more to herself than to him. And it was never about me. I was the loose thread, and you pulled me, and now the whole coat's coming apart in front of everyone, and they're going to try to bury us both in it before morning. The wind came across the apron. Somewhere behind the second hangar, a fuel truck sat cold with its lights off, and 2 lawyers waited in a room full of paper for a signature that would either save the day or start the collapse. And Richard Halston, camel overcoat, telephone in his hand, was already dialing a judge. Do-yoon looked at her, and for the first time all day he had nothing to fix and no clean minute to buy it with. "Cecilia," he said, "I need you in that room." "I know you do," she said. She picked up the medical case. "That's the part you should have thought about before you spent me to get me there." She walked back toward the north door, not fast, not dragged. The same walk she'd walked to the fence at dawn, except this time the room was waiting for her, and this time it knew her name, and that had turned out to be the most dangerous thing of all. Jin-woo caught her at the north door before her hand reached the handle. He held the tablet flat, not toward Do-yoon, toward her. "Dr. Rose, you'll want to see this one first." Cecilia stopped. She had told him to give it to Do-yoon. He hadn't. She looked at the screen. One name sat at the top of the project code. Not a nominee, not a trust, not a management company in Singapore. A signature, wet-scanned, dated 14 months back, and stamped into the joint books 3 days later to make it look like partnership. Richard Halston. His own hand. "Read it out loud," Do-yoon said. He had come up behind her without sound, and now he wanted the thing he had refused to do himself for a full day. Jin-woo read it. Project Authorization, AeroVantage Asia, opened by Richard Halston. Retro-dated into the joint ledger. Every other signature in the structure roots back to a proxy. This one doesn't. This is the only real name in the whole build. Across the hangar, at the sedans, Richard lowered the phone from his ear. He was too far to hear the words. He heard the shape of them anyway, in the way 3 people had gone still around a screen. Cecilia did the thing she always did with a bad rhythm. She counted it out. 14 months, she said. He opened it the same week I signed, the same week I started building the case for your heart. She looked up at Do-yoon. While I was learning how to keep you alive, he was learning how to hollow you out. Both were about the same thing, Do-yoon said. Neither of us was supposed to notice in time. Jin-woo swiped once. A new pain. "It's not just draining, sir. I broke the shell an hour ago. The acquisition draft isn't a side project. It's the exit." Do-yoon turned the tablet toward himself for the first time. "Show me." The wire transfers built the war chest. The double freight kept anyone from asking why the money moved. The reserve line, your name and his on top of it. That's the collateral pledged against the AeroVantage purchase. Jin-woo's voice stayed level. An operations voice reading a weather report. Han Meridian's capital. Han Meridian's infrastructure. Han Meridian's Asia access. All of it pledged. All of it at risk. And when the purchase closes, the strategic contracts, the corridor rights, the hangar slots, the carrier routes you spent 4 years earning, they don't stay with the joint venture. They transfer to AeroVantage. which is Halston. Only Halston. The room held that. Say the last part plainly, Cecilia said. Not for herself. For the two lawyers still standing inside the audit room with the door open, hearing every word. Jinwoo said it plainly. He was going to use your money to buy the thing, then walk out with the thing, and leave you holding the debt. The partnership was the instrument. He was always going to break it. He just needed it to hold long enough to fund the door he'd leave through. Do-yoon set the tablet down on the nearest crate. He did it gently, the way a man puts down something he no longer needs to grip. He didn't decide to betray me this morning, he said. This morning he found out I was watching. The plan is 14 months old. The jet was never the crime. He looked at Cecilia. The jet was the tell. She understood then what her own small humiliation had been, in the machinery of it. A reflex. 14 months of certainty that no one looked had trained a whole family to treat an inconvenient woman as furniture to be moved. Move the furniture, keep the room. It was the same hand that had signed the code. It had simply forgotten, for one morning, to check who was in the rear-facing seat. He'll run for the emergency motion, Cecilia said. He's dialing a judge right now. If he dissolves the operating agreement before the audit closes, the fleet flies, the money completes, and by Friday, there's nothing left to prove because it all belongs to someone else. Then the audit closes now, Do-yoon said. Jinwoo, what do we have that a court can't wave away? His signature on the code, the pledged collateral, the paired load sheets, same document, one field changed, 31 runs matched, the wire trail from the joint reserve to the shell, and the acquisition draft, time-stamped, accelerated 11 minutes after you grounded the fleet. Jinwoo tapped the crate beside the tablet, a stack of paper as thick as a phone book. It's all here, on paper, signed or wet-scanned. The proxies were built to survive a subpoena. His own name wasn't. He never thought anyone would read the oldest page. Do-yoon crossed to the audit room door. The two lawyers straightened. He didn't raise his voice. He never had, not once in the whole day, and that had turned out to be the frightening thing. You came to serve a dissolution notice, Do-yoon said. Serve it. I'll counter it in the same hour. Your emergency motion argues mismanagement and an unlawful ground order. My filing attaches a fraud your client signed with his own hand 14 months ago and a purchase he was funding with my collateral to strip my contracts. Ask your client which motion he'd rather have read into a public record first. The lead lawyer looked at the stack on the crate. He was good at his job, which meant he was good at knowing when the job had changed. I'd need to review. Review it, Do-yoon said. You have an hour. Then the reason code goes in writing to the tower, signed, with the audit summary as its exhibit, copied to counsel, both counsels. That's the record now. There's no clean version of this to walk to with a drink tonight. He turned back into the room. Behind him, the lawyer was already stepping to the sedans, phone rising, to tell Richard the thing Richard had spent 14 months making sure no one could tell him. Cecilia watched Richard take the call. She was too far to hear it. She didn't need to hear it. She watched a man learn that the oldest page had been read, and she watched the thing that happened to his shoulders when he learned it. Not a slump. A recalculation. The same look he'd given her twice already. The look of a man pricing his own exits. He had one hand on the sedan roof. He took it off. He turned toward the hangar and did not come toward it. Jinwoo's earpiece murmured. He listened. The judge's clerk declined the emergency motion, he said, cited a competing filing with attached exhibits of alleged fraud. They won't strip operational control from an operator who's produced signed evidence, not before a full hearing. So the fleet stays grounded, Cecilia said. The fleet stays grounded. The reserve line freezes tonight. A bank doesn't advance against collateral that's under a fraud filing. which means the acquisition doesn't close Friday, which means it doesn't close. Jin Woo almost, not quite, allowed himself something at the corner of his mouth. Arrow Vantage is a door with no money behind it now. Do-yoon didn't celebrate it. He looked, for the first time all day, tired. He looked at the black case at the end of the table, the one she had carried to the fence at dawn and never let out of her reach. "You should have been on that jet," he said. "None of this touches me if you're on that jet. He wins slow and quiet, and I'm on a machine in Seoul in 6 months, wondering where my company went." "I wasn't on the jet because your partner's daughter decided a black woman with a bag couldn't be a doctor," Cecilia said. "Don't make the thing that saved you sound like the thing that hurt you. Both are true. You keep saying that today. Let it be true here too." He heard it. He nodded once. That was where it could have ended, and it didn't. Because endings in this business are administrative. It took the rest of the day, and the 2 after it. The operating agreement dissolved, not by Richard's motion, by its own terms, once the fraud filing named a principal on both sides of a transaction. Do-yoon didn't sue for blood. He sued for structure. The joint venture unwound. The reserve line closed with the collateral intact, because the purchase never funded. The contracts Richard had meant to walk out the door with stayed exactly where they'd been earned. Han Meridian kept its corridor, its slots, its Asia access. Arrow Vantage became what it always was underneath the theater. A shell with a Singapore address and no cargo, now with a fraud filing stapled to its only real signature. Richard Halston sold, not because a court made him, because a man whose name sits on a fraud he retrodated does not get to keep his seat at the tables that matter. And Richard had always understood tables better than daughters. He sold the steak, sold the second hanger, sold the pinstripe life a piece at a time, quietly, the way he did everything, so that from a distance, it might look like strategy instead of collapse. Madison learned it the way people like Madison learn things, by what stopped arriving. The car service lapsed. The white knit dress went back in the closet and stayed there. The card declined once, in front of someone, and that was the version of the story that traveled. Weeks later, she stood in the hangar again, once, in a gray sweatshirt and white leggings and expensive sneakers that were the last expensive thing left, smaller than she had been at the foot of the stair, and she asked her father to fix it. For the first time in her life, Richard didn't. He looked at his daughter across the concrete and he said, "I can't. Not won't. Can't." It was the truest thing he'd said in 14 months, and it cost him nothing now, because there was nothing left to spend on her. The tower got its reason code in writing, signed, with the audit summary attached, copied to both councils, before the shift change, exactly as promised. Grant Whitaker's admission sat in the file with everything else. The record was complete. No one had raised their voice to build it. Cecilia did not let Do-yoon fix her career. She had told him not to touch it, and he didn't touch it. And that was the hardest thing she asked of him all week, because touching it was the only language he'd ever been fluent in. She called Dr. Aronson herself. She did not ask for the fellowship track. She told him what she wanted, which was less than he'd offered, and entirely hers. A partial appointment at the University Medical Center, cardiology, her name on the door, her hours her own, the private consulting agreement kept separate and disclosed in writing so no board could ever call it a favor, and no man could ever call her a decoration. Aronson, who had cooled when the optics got complicated, warmed when the optics got clean, and Cecilia let him because she had stopped needing him to be brave. She only needed the position to be real and the terms to be hers. She brought Dr. Elliot Vance onto the flight medical team herself. She interviewed him, navy blazer over an open collar, thin-rimmed glasses, a calm she recognized because it was the same currency she traded in. She hired him not to replace her, but to make the protocol survive her. So the crews were never one person deep again. So the thing that had happened at dawn could never happen, because one woman with a bag was the only one who knew what was in it. Noah's fever broke the second day. She was home for it. Mrs. Okafor had done everything right, and Cecilia checked the numbers anyway, out of habit, out of love, and then she let the boy tell her about a dinosaur for 40 minutes, because that was the other job, and it was the one that mattered. Weeks later, she stood in the same hangar. No Halston, no stair to be blocked at the foot of, no security to walk her to a painted line, no audience. The fleet flew again, under a single name now, and the jet on the apron was fueled and ready, and hers to board, as what she was, which had never changed, and had finally been said out loud. She wore a gray suit and an ivory blouse, and she carried the black case, because she would always carry the black case. Do-yoon came across the concrete in the charcoal suit, the koi at his collar catching the hangar light, and he stopped in front of her the way he'd stopped at the fence, first, before anyone else. "They cleared us," he said. "Wheels up in 20. She opened the case. She checked the seal with her thumb, the way she'd taught him, the way he'd checked it back to her on the worst morning. Intact, 2 auto-injectors, the vial, the card in her own hand. She took out the small blister and set 1 tablet in his palm, and held out the water she'd already opened, because she knew him, because knowing him was the whole architecture of the last 14 months. "Before we board," she said, "you take it now, not at altitude, not when you feel it. Now." He looked at the pill in his hand, and then at her. He didn't argue. He took it. He'd never once argued about this, not from the first bad night, and that was the thing under everything else, that the man who grounded a fleet over a nod would swallow a tablet the second she said so. "They threw you off the jet," he said, "because they were sure you had no power. And that mistake," Cecilia said, closing the case, "cost them the entire sky." She walked to the stair, not fast, not dragged, the same walk. Except this time she climbed it, and the case went up with her, and no one on the apron would ever again mistake the doctor for furniture, because the whole field had watched what happened to the men who did. They threw her off the jet because they thought Cecilia had no power, and that exact mistake cost them the entire sky. If you want to watch all the stories without any ads and also get access to bonus scenes, extended epilogues, and exclusive spicy chapters, head over to our Patreon. Scan the QR code on the screen. The link is in the description or in the pinned comment. See you there. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever built a career of your own, a title, a doctorate, years of work, and watched someone decide you were invisible in a single glance? When the people closest to the deal are the ones betraying it, do you speak for yourself or let someone else speak for you? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, betrayal, and quiet power, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.